Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jenny Gill, Chairman of the Design and Mental Health Network, and I'd like to welcome you to the final session of the Design and Mental Health Digital Week. Well, it's certainly been a learning experience for us all, and that's just using the technology. Happily, there have been very few problems, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank James Lee and his team, Chelsea and Mel from StepX, who I know have worked long hours to ensure the success of this week. Thank you. So on to the session. If you would like to ask a question, you'll see you've got a chat box. If you will put a question mark at the beginning of the sentence so we can differentiate between questions and statements. Let me just first of all introduce the panel to you. We have Richard Walker, who is Director of Capital Investment and Estate Services at Pennine Care NHS Foundation Trust. We have Neil Orpwood, who is Associate Director of Healthcare at HLM Architects. We have Philip Ross, who is Director of the Design and Mental Health Network and SafeHinge Primera. We hopefully have Mark Reed, but he is having connectivity problems at the moment. Mark is Head of Capital and Property at Greater Manchester Mental Health NHS Foundation Trust. And we also have Wendy De Silva, the Mental Health Lead for the IBI Group. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to invite each one to talk about their highlights from the week and what they will take away from the digital week that we've just undertaken. However, Richard and Mark, both working in the NHS, have had little opportunity to join us online. So they're going to give us the NHS perspective of COVID-19 and the effect it has had. So without further ado, we'll start with Richard. Richard.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. My apologies or sorry, good luck to everybody who can't see me at the present time. I've switched my camera off to try and improve the bandwidth so I can speak to you all. So part of my presentation was going to be how good the IT has survived during this pandemic, but obviously it seems to have let me down, especially today. So 12 weeks in, I think it is, in terms of all of this, and what have we learned in terms of a mental health trust and how we've been responding to that? What I can say is that in terms of our wards, we've actually seen a reduction in patients. Patients have, those who haven't been sectioned have decided in the lockdown to stay at home with relatives. We've found on our wards we've had fewer incidents in terms of patient disturbance and issues. In fact, the relationship probably between staff and patients has probably been exceptional. The actual relationships has been really, really good. And probably we've actually seen a lot better teamwork between the patients on the ward and staff, and also the rest of the team responsible in providing care. That all being said, there's been a certain amount of fear, I suppose, across everybody, recognising that this is quite an unusual situation for the vast majority of people. So that's been different. In terms of the community, we've obviously had more patients in the community because those who haven't been in hospital have gone home. We've used a greater use of technology to ensure we have contacts, and our do not attend, our contacts with patients have actually improved. My comment would that be, we don't really know how effective that has been, really. That's something we've got to really monitor as time goes on. I think the comment has been so far, anecdotally, that the contact with known patients has been good, but new patients has been a challenge. I think that's probably fair to say. And again, staff in the community have had some fears as well, especially when they've been going to patients' homes. In terms of office work, there's been a greater numbers of people working remotely. We've probably had about 25% office activity, so 75% reduction in the office. And technology has stood up to the test. I've got to say, over the last couple of days, mine has been letting me down slightly, but that's been the case. And the benefit of this is that the NHS has been talking about going paperless. Well, hey, we went paperless basically overnight, so that was a success. And I think most people have found it quite enjoyable. But I think now we've got to week 10. Now we've got past week 10. I think up to week 10, everybody's finding it okay. I think as we got to week 10 and beyond, people are struggling with this home working. Right, as we're starting to think about getting back to the new normal, we want to try and keep our inpatient numbers lower. We want to try and actually maintain that, because in most cases patients who can be seen in the community, it is better for them. We're trying to increase our community offer. We're changing workplaces. One thing that we are picking up as an estates team is hand washing. Generally, hand washing in consulting rooms in mental health hasn't been a requirement. So we're now looking at putting wash hand basins into consulting rooms and also into waiting areas. Group therapy, as we get back to the new normal, is going to be a challenge, and there's a lot of push to actually increase the group therapy before COVID. So that's been going to be a challenge. And also, getting people to comply with basic rules like, walk to the left, use the staircases on the left-hand side, and watch out for the hot spots around lifts, beverage bays, toilets, office machinery such as copiers and such like. Things such as we've actually started introducing a lot more hand sanitizers where we haven't got wash hand basins and surface wipes. We want to try and keep those people working from home, which can do. In terms of future design, we're just wondering, we're actually starting to put, small partitions across open plan offices. So question mark would be, is the future open plan offices come to an end, and will there be an overall reduction overall in offices? Some of the things that we are looking at for the future is obviously the consideration of putting wash basins in waiting areas, consulting rooms, increasing screening in open plan offices, recognising that for a lot of work, it may be an opportunity to increase the operational hours, and also changing some of the working patterns to more transient working, where staff may be coming into buildings maybe for 1 or 2 days a week rather than 5 days a week and 3 days from home. We are getting ready to start to do coroner's investigations and coroner's hearings, not investigations, coroner's hearings by the use of technology. And what we're finding is some of our older meeting rooms, our older boardrooms, work better than the newer facilities, mainly because they're wider and the tables actually give better social distancing. We hope to reduce waiting. That's been successful so far, reduce waiting times. Some of the things we've been looking at as well is around ventilation. Air conditioning doesn't really work because it moves the air around in this current situation. So we've actually been switching off air conditioning plants, especially the very basic air chilling devices, which are probably used in things such as holiday apartments abroad, things like that. Some basic air cooling systems have been switching off. But some of the questions that I would put forward is, ventilation in most buildings is actually, air intake comes from the ceiling, air extract goes also out from the ceiling. So you're always pulling air upwards. So the question mark is, in the future, should we be actually extracting ventilation from floor level, as we have in dental surgeries, to take any anaesthetic gases away from the patients and the staff. The other one for me that I'm always keen to do, it's probably if I am going to leave a legacy, I really want to get rid of 90-degree corners in hospitals and also in a lot of public buildings. I always believe 45-degree corners in splays are a lot better, because it does allow that social distancing, and you don't actually bump into somebody when you turn a corner. You can see what's going on, and therefore, when you're actually trying to avoid people, even in the normal sense of that word, you can actually make an effort to walk on the other side of the corridor. So it has been interesting. It's been quite busy, to be honest. Working from home has actually been probably more stressful than working in the office. So I don't know whether people have found that, but I'll finish off with that and look forward if Mark's been able to join us to see whether anybody else has any comments in terms of this new world as we enter or coming to the end of week 12, aren't we? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Richard. That was interesting. I actually find working from home less stressful, I must admit, and I get more done because I don't have the interruptions. But it's I've been doing it a long time. I'm probably used to it now. Now, I'm not sure whether we have Mark with us. Mark, are you here? No. Unfortunately, we're having Mark is having connectivity problems. The support team are all working very hard with him at the moment to try and get him here. And he was going to talk next. However, we shall move on and we'll bring him in as soon as we are able to get him into the session. So now we're going to move on to Wendy. Wendy De Silva, who is, as I'm sure you all know, an architect, head of mental health lead at IBI Group. Thank you, Wendy.
Thanks, and I will now attempt to share my screen. Oh, it works, great. So it sometimes goes, no, I better not say sometimes goes, touch wood, right. So what have been my takeaways from the digital week? I think the Designing Mental Health Network had to be congratulated on having come here, actually, because so much was happening all around, and it's great to be talking about issues around COVID and mental health design collectively, and there's so much to learn. Being able to learn from each other over the distance is a brilliant opportunity, so I'd like to say thank you to everybody. So hooray, we could do digital. So it's both personal, I think, and also impersonal in a way. Things that I loved about it was seeing through the keyholes of a lot of people. People sometimes that I've known for years. I just got a little bit more rounded sense of their lives, and I love that. I thought it was amazing that we could do local, national and international and do it without travel. I thought that was a really interesting insight. And it made no difference whether you were in New York or Australia or London or Scotland. So that was a big learn. And it was inclusive because it doesn't cost anything to get around other than having what you already have. So it is accessible to all of those who are digitally able. I think it'd be interesting to understand, who was excluded, and I think we need to think about that. But on the whole, for those that were able, it's been brilliant. So what did I miss? I really missed that feel of the conference where you reconnect, where you shake hands, where you might hug someone, where you get a feeling in a room. I don't think that can be replicated, and we tried hard, but I think there are things that we can't do digitally that we need to recognise too. So what we have got though, and it's been alluded to already, is flexibility to catch up in the future. So there's a reference and a resource library. So all of this content will be collated and put into on demand. And within that, you'll be able to filter it through sector insights. So I think that's a really big plus. I know we could do it before, but I think it feels different to me. It feels tangibly different the way we're doing it now. So this is just a recap on the sessions we had, because not all of us will have been able to make all of them. One was how to progress, one was sector resilience, international perspectives, practical ideas was one that I contributed to, stakeholder engagement and products. And for all of those that I was able to make, which was more than half of them, I learned quite a lot, even though I've been doing this job for 25 years. So it was really useful. I think the other lesson, and it sinks in daily, but it's really beginning to shape how we look forward, is COVID is a life changer. It affects every single one of us. It's everywhere, whether it's the home or the hospital. And I thought one of the interesting insights, and it was Andrea Brambilla from the Design Health Lab of Milan, who's a PhD researcher, was saying you really need to look everywhere. You need to look at people's home housing conditions. You need to look at their communities. You need to look at hospitals. And actually, if we're going to make things better for people with poor mental health and to avoid COVID, the home is the place to start. and we should be focusing there. We know now that we've got a lot of people who are isolated. We know that mental health is going to be an increasingly big issue. Let's broaden our horizons. So it's going to have multiple effects. One of the things that these sessions shows is that we need an armory of responses. Ideally, they'd be coordinated, and I think this Digital Week's one of the ways in which we can all begin to understand and appreciate what each other are doing. And of course, there's a huge urgency to this because it's got to reduce the number of deaths. I mean, I had a shock yesterday. A colleague of mine's mother died. This is very, very real, and I'm sure a lot of you out there will also be affected. And so, my sympathies and condolences. And more urgently, we need to do the best by everybody, the best we can. So, what do we do differently? Well, we've got an amazing breadth and depth of knowledge and experience, and I think one of the things that I was really pleased to see, and I know the network does this already, but that's just a list of the different types of people who were talking. And the message that I got was we are not in our silos, even though we're physically separated. And I think the more we can enable these conversations, the better. So thanks to all those people, and of course I will have missed some just purely because the variety is so huge. So I think it's great that we have this opportunity to share and learn from what we're doing here. So just to recap on some of the learning points, really. The implications are unknown. We don't know whether we're going to get a second peak soon or whether we're going to keep it under control. We don't know the time scale. We know we need to have continual vigilance. We know we need to be inventive, but we also know that from the presentations we've seen, we all, or at least many of us, love a challenge. And we've seen innovation, we've seen real ingenuity, and we've seen technology really come to the fore in lots of very positive ways. And as I said before, I say that as a technophobe. So I'm actually enjoying learning and learning how to communicate in different ways very much. And I think this is just a little bit of the research that I was doing for the practical ideas thing, the shift towards digital, and the fact that the feedback that's coming from the shift towards digital is so positive was a real takeaway for me. And that does also apply to mental health trusts. TZESC and Wear Valleys have got 94% of the people who were surveyed saying that they would do a video appointment again. And I think, just as Richard said earlier, being able to do more quickly and more in the community or at home is going to be able to shift the way we deliver services. And it's an opportunity here that I think we need to understand and do the best possible thing we can do with. For decades, we've been talking about moving healthcare into the community. And here it is, it's actually not even in the community, it's got to be in the home because of our present circumstances. It's a quick and sharp learning curve, but isn't it an interesting one that we're going through? And this I thought was really an interesting way of looking at things from a new perspective, and it's what Moorfields Eye Hospital are doing. And they're looking at a network model for staff and for their users of their services and delivering services differently. But the thing that caught my eye is there's 27 sites they've got. They've, for the moment, consolidated that onto 7 for their essential services. And what they've done, and are continuing to do, is map where their staff live and where their staff work, look at walking or cycling to their work. So we've got active travel, which of course is good for your health and well-being. It also minimises the need for public transport. So they're still in the process of this, but when the 27 sites reopen, there'll be an opportunity to see if staff can walk or cycle to the nearest site to their home. and it has positive side effects. Well-being, I've already said, reduces the carbon footprint. And the other thing that they've observed is obviously their carbon footprint's already massively reduced because so many people are working from home. I think it'd be interesting to see what's on the other side of the scale, on the home side. It's spring and summer, so we'll have to see how long this lasts. So the final thought I'm going to leave with from this week is the fallout and the side effects. It's going to change our lives for our generation. The social and economic effects are to be determined. We get news by the day. Today's was about the economic impact for April's figures, down 20%, which is more than it was in the 2008 crisis. So it's going to be significant difference going forward. And the COVID crisis coincides completely with the climate crisis. And I think our challenge is to make the most of the positive side effects of this. I really feel personally a responsibility to future generations to make some opportunity, to make most of this opportunity, because it's a dreadful pandemic that we're in. So let's seize the moment. So that's my review for this week, and thank you, DIMH, for putting it on.
Thank you very much, Wendy. That was an excellent summary of the week. I thoroughly enjoyed that. Thank you. I'm happy to say that Mark has been able to phone in and join us, so I'm going to hand over without any more ado to Mark.
Technical issues probably this week and today alone. Just kind of COVID and what they've had. If I've got to talk to her to hear the comments. So obviously, in terms of the effect that it has on us, it's kind of been twofold, and that's in the ongoing kind of project, and that was from obviously the lockdown on the 23rd of March. So we had obviously in those unprecedented times whereby what did we do? A number of work were already on site in situ, and actually essentially make locking areas off, so that will allow our service users and so on to not access external spaces, external environments that are currently under refurbishment. So, or did we kind of make safe and then lock them down, or did we actually try to continue those and try to manage those in a safe environment to allow those to be used over the next couple of weeks when it first started? So in terms of a trust perspective, we kind of reviewed all that and kind of a combination of those three factors where we closed down areas which were kind of deemed as unnecessary to kind of undertake those works, but then actually tried to put a lot of effort into completing other works over those first few weeks in the back end of March to make sure that environments that were currently being closed for refurbishments were able to be put back into use and practice. But obviously, with the challenges that we faced were around a number of contractors then were kind of stopping trading, were furloughing staff, were having troubles with sourcing materials and so on. So there was a number of different challenges which I think many of us will agree we've not faced before. So trying to work through that was a significant challenge in making sure we can maintain the needs of the trust and maintain that business as usual. So in terms of how that kind of affected how the things we start to look at now, as we, not necessarily that things are starting to settle, but as we're kind of starting to see what's on the horizon in the future, is we're starting to look at a lot more detail now in terms of what can we learn from this, how is this going to impact not only our current environment in mental health, but our future environments. Now, obviously that's can be somewhat easier when we're starting to plan new developments, and we can start to consider some of the to social distancing, hygiene, infection prevention, all those key principles behind it. But actually, in terms of our existing accommodation and our existing environment, how can we start to implement safe changes? I mean, for example, we have some old accommodation whereby we have dormitory provisions, which obviously are by no means ideal, before COVID, but actually the challenges that that's brought with it has been privacy and dignity associated with infection prevention and social distancing. So that's having an effect on our current environments, whereby we're reducing occupancy by 50% in those areas, but actually we're trying to come up with measures now in the short term to try and make those areas as safe for those our service users in those areas. So those are some of our kind of living and breathing challenges we're kind of working through. Like I said, in terms of there's two different sides of the coins there. In terms of the existing environments, we're trying to retrofit measures into place to make them as safe as reasonably practicable. But obviously, in terms of the long-term future of new developments and new designs and what those measures can bring, I think some of the developments we were already drawing to a close at the end of March, whereby we were introducing kind of vision panels to service user bedrooms. They've all been massively beneficial in terms of observations and stuff like that. So some of those elements have really kind of rang true in terms of they were designed for something else, but in terms of other things that are associated with the pandemic, they've proved to be quite beneficial. And I think what we're always looking to now is what's the next innovation, what are the different elements that are going to continue to progress and migrate and evolve on the back of COVID and anything else for the future.
Thank you, Mark. Are you still with us?
Sorry, Jenny. Yeah, still with us. I think the line went off for me slightly there, but I think we're pretty much drawing to a close anyway.
Okay, well, do carry on. It's all right.
No, it's okay. I was probably just drawing to a close, Jenny. So I think we just...
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry we couldn't see you, but I'm glad we managed to get you in to contribute. And thank you for your contribution. It was excellent. Moving on, our next speaker is Philip Ross. Philip?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I could hear myself there. I'm going to try and share my screen. Technology's on my side, it might work. There we go. Yeah, I've been really lazy. So
oh dear, Philip's having connectivity issues. Hopefully he'll be back in a second.
don't hear me.
Everybody's... Okay, Philip, are you back?
Oh. Okay. Seem to be...
You're coming in and out at the moment. I keep getting a thing saying you're having connectivity issues, Philip. Shall we move on to Neil, and we'll see if you can get back in with a better connection?
Yeah, that's okay with me.
Okay. Do you want to unshare your screen first of all, Philip? And we'll come back to you after Neil. It's frozen completely.
So I was just going to talk, Jenny, so I don't need to.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Okay, shall I go? I suppose one of the dangers about being the last, maybe not quite the last in the list, now that Philip's having trouble, is a lot of the stuff I was going to say is probably being covered, but I thought I had 6 key issues, I suppose, that I was wanting to pick up. And one of those that I suppose we found through a lot of the talks is that we've obviously had some horrible stories through the whole of the COVID crisis, but actually one of the biggest things is that initiatives have moved through the process a lot faster than you would normally expect. We've had lots of red tape has been sorted. It's the resilience of the healthcare system we have has been excellent, and obviously we're still in the midst of the pandemic, but the ability to be able to cope has been outstanding. You know, we've approached this whole crisis with an estate, if you like, that was having trouble. We were constantly trying to renew old buildings, but actually a lot of particularly the acute hospitals have coped, and obviously the mental health hospitals have managed to. I think what I found is that the access to the services and their ability or I suppose an understanding of the issues that the COVID crisis has brought. So the numbers of people that are suddenly being isolated, there's a lot more. There's an acknowledgement. There's a huge increase in the numbers of people who potentially are starting to have to deal with mental health issues. And before the crisis, of course, we knew there was I think it was 1 in 4 that have some kind of issue that is seen as being even more of an issue now because of the isolation. But we've seen effectively sort of the pushing of the IAPT's work in terms of the access to psychotherapy and treatments, and a simpler way of maybe being for people to be able to access them without stigma, which of course was one of the main issues of the white paper, the 5-year plan, which is due to be complete at the end of next year, and would be great. I mean, it's a difficult one because, of course, everything's been thrown in the air. But, of course, what would be really interesting would be to see how that white paper is pushed and developed even further now, given the issues we've seen. Just touching on sort of that access side, one of the things that I went to a great talk last year, towards the end of last year, and one of the things that was picked up on was the government's initiative. There was due to be a white paper out, I think, at Christmas, that allowed for additional support services within schools. So there is a program, there are funds available for schools to be able to provide dedicated support. That, again, because of all of the issues and the closure of the schools has turned around, and it would be great to see if that white paper and any further funding initiatives can be brought in, because of course the students, school age children, being able to identify issues and cope with them at that much earlier stage is really where we want to be going in terms of that ability to be able to prevent later issues. So I think Richard sort of touched on it a little bit earlier, just in terms of the briefing, and Mark as well. The lessons learned side is going to be really important. So it's great to see that ability of being able to access a sort of resource library from the lessons learned that we've had over the last week in the digital week. But what we're finding as healthcare architects is that the briefing that is either in place on projects that are being developed now, or for projects that are beginning to be thought about and in the pipeline, is going to change quite a lot, because we suddenly have got that ability to be able to look forward, and instead of just putting we need a flexible space, we can be a bit more specific about how that flexibility could work, taking the lessons learned from particularly from COVID, but trying to understand how the and I hate the phrase, but the new normal might look. And I think one of the ways that we found that, particularly where, as I say, the ability of the NHS to be able to cope with the crisis, you know, in most cases over the course of a week, wards were turned into IPCUs. The ability to be able to get those spaces back to what they were before, I think, is being reviewed. And I think that's the case in mental health facilities as well. It's that ability to be able to think how we can use those spaces rather than just a complete reconversion. One of my subjects in terms of the talks was just on staff welfare and well-being. just to touch on that again really is so important. I think that we don't lose sight, and I know everybody has become much more aware of the efforts on the front line and how much the staff put in, but it was quite a struggle before the crisis to make sure that the facilities that are available for staff, and that might be right from what you'd expect in terms of staff rooms right the way through to the use of storage areas to make life easier in terms of operating within departments. It's really important, and that we've got such a good opportunity now with the rebriefing opportunities for moving forward to make sure that we include those kind of things. And it's about engagement. We all know it's the discussion and seeing what can be included. But I suppose my takeaway from that was it doesn't have to be an all singing and dancing solution. We don't have to comply completely with the well-building standard to make it work. It's little elements that can make such a big difference. I think Wendy's touched on one of the other things, the moving services into the community. That was a huge item on the agenda initially in terms of releasing space, depressurizing some of the acute hospitals, but also in terms of outpatient facilities and clinics for mental health. And we need to do this in a forward-thinking way, making sure that we don't do the knee-jerk reaction to just putting stuff out to closer to where you think it's needed. We need to make sure that that's carefully thought through, assessed, really providing it in the community that needs those services, but maybe talking more to the stakeholders who provide those kind of services already. So the community groups that almost quietly in the background carry out those tasks and they can actually help to support and to de-stress some of the main sites. And then finally, really for me, it was the control of infection issue, which is always been a huge issue throughout the crisis. Of course, the key element has been the increase in numbers of beds and the bed requirements. And I think what we've realized as a sector is that the infection control procedures are really important. Hospitals are going to start to make sure that they have facilities that either have a blue or green zone, so it's an area that you know, whether it's like a sort of an airport model almost, where you have an airside and landside, so that you actually start to not continue the strength of the social distancing or spatial distancing. I like Wendy's term better than social distancing. It's that ability to be able to control's the wrong word, but be able to guide people a bit more so that you are ending up with a more social space at the same time as a safer space. So that's it from me. Quick summary. I'll hand back to you, Jenny.
Thank you very much, Neil. We have Philip back, and at the moment he's green, which means he's good. Crossed. So without further ado,
I'll try the screen share again, and hopefully it doesn't banjax things. Let's try that. So I really had kind of two major observations this week. I think one of the ones that stood out to me was actually part of Rosemary Jensen's sector resilience talk. And it was actually talking about the challenges that we have in terms of parity of funding. One of the first observations that Rosemary was making, that we still have approximately 1,000 mental health beds, which are in dormitory style. Yet the government made a commitment to move to single bed care about 20 years ago. And on top of that, Rosemary was making the point about the health infrastructure plan, which was launched in last autumn, with 2.7 billion committed to 6 hospitals and a further £100 million of seed funding committed to an additional 34 hospitals to be built or considered for building from 25 to 2035. And yet there was only one out of 27 of those organisations involved with that was actually a mental health trust. And even that one was actually more of a community hospital than a mental health trust. So there's this major question where we've got a long-standing commitment that's still not been resolved. Discussion that, well, the mental health portion will be coming in the third phase, HIP 3, but then that's not due to start to 2035. And so I still come back to the same point of when will we get the parity of funding and the parity of attention from government of the importance and significance for investing in the mental health estate. And hopefully that will something that continues to grow. And there's many articles which are out there supporting the need for it. And I think that's something we'll all see continuing. Other points to pick up on. No surprises here of what I'm going to say next, because I probably sound like a scratch record with this topic, but testing. Anybody who's spent 5 minutes with me will know my passion around testing and the importance of testing. Obviously, this week there's been a number of manufacturers talk about new innovations, new products. And then alongside that, we've got the challenges that COVID will present. If we have this ongoing physical distancing, how will we consider new products? How will we consider the latest innovation which helps save lives and improve the care models that we can actually provide? If we're moving to more and more remote considerations of products, then that can be challenging. Testing considerations and product considerations within mental health environments has been a very tactile process. People want to touch and feel and see how things work. And so all the more for us to focus on having an independent test once, review many times approach, which is what we're looking at with the BRE and Design and Mental Health Network collaboration. This has been a culmination of about 5 or 6 years worth of work. We have now launched the testing guidance. It's online at BRE. If anybody wants the link, we'll make it available. And then we're actually in probably about a couple of months away from being ready to actually opening the doors to testing products. And I think the real beauty of this will be allowing people to do desk-based exercises and reviews and assessments of multiple products, all within the space of an afternoon. And that won't just help make better decisions, because you'll have the full range of information available. But I also believe it will be able to help give more time to clinical staff, to designers, to estates teams, to think about the recovery aspects of one product versus another. Ultimately, this often gets shoehorned in at the very end because we spent so much time assessing for ligature performance or assessing for anti-barricade performance or robustness. And actually, it's possibly one of the biggest and most significant parts that will have the real impact. So as that comes online, I suppose my big ask is please get behind it. Ask your manufacturers that you're working with to make sure that they're testing. And I think collectively we'll all move forward. And then my final point is just really the beauty of on demand. I know this is a point that Wendy mentioned. We switched a lot of our meetings, as probably most people did, to online meetings. We've been doing webinars as a company for the past 3 months now. And one of the biggest points of feedback we've been getting from clinical staff is, just like iPlayer, just like Netflix, they can watch and learn and consider products in their own time. If you then mix this with polling systems, then actually what you can do is get a far wider cast of the net in terms of those who can be involved in reviewing products, assessing them, seeing them from different perspectives. A simple point that was observed to us was a nighttime shift nurse who made the comment that for her to get involved in the new building product assessment, she would have to come out and disrupt her sleep because the sales meetings or the presentations of a new product would always happen during the day. Now what she was able to do was go and watch it at 11 o'clock at night when nobody else was working, and she had a bit of peace and quiet before her shift started. And that was just a kind of really important and significant benefit that can come from our new ways of working and our new normal. And I think all those different perspectives will, I think, ultimately create better opportunities for designing better spaces. So those are my 3 major takeaways. And at that point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. You can all see what I watch on BBC iPlayer as well. Confess to my Doctor Who observations, but yeah. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you very much, Philip. We won't hold it against you. Right, just a few observations from me before we move on to answering some questions. So if any of you got questions, now's the time to type them into the chat box. Couple of things that came across loud and clear to me during the week, and I've attended every single presentation and session, is that there is a massive need for flexibility moving forward. We need to be able to use rooms flexibly, and this is going to help with the space, because there is going to be a requirement for more space for distancing. Somebody during the week talked about having to turn offices into bedrooms at one point so that they could isolate people. Years ago, when we built mental health units, there were always anti-ligature throughout, or reduced ligature, sorry, Philip, reduced ligature throughout. Nowadays, there is a tendency for them to be reduced ligature in patient areas, and in areas, particularly offices, where patients do not have access, for them to be, well, basically full of ligatures. That might be something that we want to look at, particularly in terms of the windows and that type of thing. Additional space. Are we going to need additional space? We don't know how long this is going on. We may well need bigger units. So we need to be able to use the space that we can have flexibly. Interestingly, one thing that did stick with me was Frank Pitts from America, when he was talking on, I think it was the first day, he was talking about using, as we are doing here, digital meetings, whether it's Zoom or Teams or this type of thing. And he said it really helps when you know the people who are in the meeting with you. If you don't, you need to be able to watch body language. And one of the things that they were doing was actually having people on the call who were literally just watching the body language and nothing else, so that they were picking up where there were things. And I do think that's an issue. I mean, I think the technology now is wonderful. We have something to thank COVID for, because it has actually moved the technology on massively. It's not so long ago that if somebody said, oh, let's have a conference call on the telephone, you died because you couldn't tell who was talking. So I think there are some positives. And the other thing that we mustn't do is lose those positives. Technology must continue to advance. We must continue to look at virtual clinics and how we can offer services differently. So moving on to questions now. The first one is from Huey Clark, and this is to, I think, Richard and Mark. What resilience measures are the NHS adopting for the potential of a second spike of COVID-19? Richard, would you like to? Richard, unmute your mic.
Sorry about that. I was using the shortcut of pressing down the space bar, but it didn't seem to work. So there we go. Trying to use the technology to its best and failed again. Right. I mean, interesting, as we've just been talking, some new guidance has just come out, obviously ensuring that from the government that everybody wears face masks or face covering as they enter hospitals as of Monday. We genuinely hope, obviously, we don't get this second spike as long as people continue to abide by the guidance and keeping the 2 metre social distancing. It is fair to say, from a mental health point of view, we don't see the effects immediately as a result of this, but also the continuing of the social distancing or spatial distancing will, I think, continue to increase the anxiety levels and the mental illness within community settings. So we know that's going to increase our requirements. In terms of day-to-day and immediate response, we have got significant volumes now of hand sanitizers, face masks. Our biggest issue now is actually how to store them, and in a lot of cases, from a mental health point of view, we're offering them back into acute hospitals to actually ease some of their pressures. But I'm pleased to say that if we do get a resurgence, we're in a lot better place than we were at the start of this in terms of PPE and appropriate hand sanitizer materials. Mark, I don't know whether you can help to add anything to this.
Yeah, I think you've kind of summarised that quite well, Richard. I think, to be honest, in terms of kind of the day-to-day operations, probably the only thing I'd probably add to that is I think in terms of the key business continuity and amongst the other kind of PPE elements that you kind of talked on, some of the day-to-day stuff is, I think we've here for certainly for quite some time. Certainly from, I don't think we're planning for this is all going to be over in a few time. We're seeing this for certainly in kind of certainly over the short and medium term, and trying to plan accordingly for that. And I think obviously we don't necessarily know what's going to happen over the next 2, 4, 6, 12 months, etc. But I think what we're just trying to maintain is as we're putting measures in place now that they're safe and secure for that short and medium term.
Thank you, Mark. There's another one for Richard and Mark, so we'll go on to that one next, which is from Paul Marsh. Paul says, you touched on changes towards staff working patterns. Are ward staff now working longer hours across fewer shifts? This clearly emphasises the importance of designing staff working environments, as referenced by Neil.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we're trying to discourage staff working. Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah, we're trying to discourage staff working longer shift patterns, to be honest, because they actually work long enough. So actually, the biggest issues here, I think, is actually giving staff the opportunities to take breaks. But one of the things that possibly we've been very poor of in the past is providing appropriate staff rooms and breakout areas for staff. And I think we've classed a number of them, like a number of trusts have called them wobble rooms. I think where people can disappear and just get a bit of freedom, a bit of break from the intense environments that they've been working in. So I think we do need to do more. We have actually created more rooms to actually create for staff breakouts. Obviously, still mindful that the rooms need to be bigger to allow staff and social distancing or spatial distancing. But yeah, in terms of actually staff working longer hours, we're trying to reduce that. And our biggest pressure now is actually trying to get staff from all aspects of the business, to be honest, including what I'll class as admin workers, if I put myself in that category, as the need to actually take some break. But we've been on this for now 12 weeks, and I think we're all finding it, bit stressful, bit hard work, and we need a little bit of therapy. Something like myself, I'm used to taking nice holidays every 12 weeks. So I'm ready for one. I'm ready for the sun and everything else like that. So and that's right from our frontline staff. So people need to take some rest breaks, and that's really important. So hopefully that's answered the question.
Thank you, Richard. Mark, anything to add?
No, probably not really in that one. I think Richard's probably answered that quite suitably and well-rounded, I think.
Thank you very much. Okay, next question is for everyone. What engagement methods have been adopted for service user engagement during the pandemic? This is from Huey Clark. Who'd like to start?
I'm happy to start with that one. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
In terms of user engagement, I think this has really been quite interesting in terms of a couple of our new developments that we're doing, and I think where we've tried to utilise technology, we've been using a lot of kind of Microsoft Teams, but in assistance with that, we've created kind of mini kind of workbooks, and those have been utilised really well. So we've actually issued kind of hard copies to service users to start to talk about environmental changes, to about design implications, etc., and allowed them to kind of use that as a hard copy but interactive, where we can take that data on board, and then we followed that up with scheduled kind of Teams calls to individual wards to kind of discuss through some of those thoughts, emotions, feelings around those. So that's how we've tried to do things a little bit differently, with utilising a combination of technology and probably older methods in the absence of physical service user interaction in terms of workshops and so on. And we found that's worked really, really positively and has been well received today.
Thank you, Mark. Anyone else?
Yeah, just to really comment on that. I mean, we've just been using technology more, but what's what's been really evident is a lot more interaction between patients and staff through all this. It's like anything in life, I suppose. If it's new to everybody, everybody joins in and actually shares their experience, and therefore in terms of doing that, there's been a lot more interaction around just the day-to-day operations of the wards and what works and what doesn't work. So that's really helped, I think, as part of COVID, but actually, a lot of learning points from outside of COVID. To be fair, in terms of any interaction with discussions around new developments and actually thinking for the future, to be fair, we haven't really entered into that at the present time. We're still trying to ponder around how we have effective group sessions where we can actually meet people face-to-face as much as possible, because I think that's one thing in a business of providing mental health. A lot of it is actually seeing people on a face-to-face basis and actually getting some involvement and trying to get some activity around thinking around how future ward design could be and how future relationships on the ward works. So we still need to do a lot more thinking around that, really. I'm sure we can actually learn a lot from the social distancing, and some of the things we're thinking around is around having smaller groups, but actually a larger number of those groups, if that makes sense. So we actually have small groups of maybe 6 to 8 people in a room, but then linked to other groups around the trust using technology to do that.
Thank you, Richard. Anyone else Neil? Would you like to come in on this?
Yeah, I just put a little note in for Huey to say that we've done very similar, really, what sort of Richard and Mark have talked about in terms of using Teams, of course, and that ability to share screens and to be able to scribble live on drawings, or show people on the screen itself. What we have found is actually one of the positives is the big problem for us was, of course, trying to get everybody in the same room together before. Whereas now, through technology, it's a lot easier. You do get much more uptake. That does mean there's a little bit more control required in terms of who's going to make those final decisions, because you do get a lot more interest, and that's great for the project. But I think, again, it's one of those things where, to a certain extent, we're all learning together. We're sort of trying to find our way through the best bits of software, which ones work well, which ones are starting to get good results, and which ones maybe going to lead on to even better engagement processes that we can hang on to and use once we hopefully get out of the bigger crisis and can start meeting up again. And I think for us, in terms of as architects and trying to design healing spaces, one of the main things is that ability to be able to feel and understand the surroundings, particularly if you're trying to refurbish your ward, for example. You need to be able to visit site, and yet, of course, we understand the problems and the safety concerns about being able to do that.
One other thing, just Jenny, if I can add into that as well, I think as well as the team-based systems as well, one of the things we found really useful is there's polling software systems. Now they can be accessed by a mobile phone. You just go to a short URL and put in a digit code. But one of the great things is you can get 20 or 30 people all giving their opinion at the same time. Now, we've even started thinking about whether we use this in face-to-face meetings as well, not just in the online versions, because again, you can get a really widespread voice, and it kind of democratizes perhaps the decision, but also just hearing more and more perspectives at once. Systems like Mentimeter, they're really, really interactive, very visual in the results as well. So yeah, I think that's another note that I would add in for people who are looking at that and those team group meetings as a way to get the feedback.
Thank you, Philip. Anyone else? Moving on to another question now. Wendy has asked, Frank Pitts said around 20% of people in the New York City mental health hospitals, I'm sorry about my clock, it's chiming, had contracted COVID, which is a very high percentage, more than double that of prisons, which are known black spots. What are your statistics on this? Richard, again, I think, or Mark?
Okay. Right. We've had quite a low levels of infection rates within our hospitals, with the exception, to be fair, of elderly care hospitals, and especially those where we've got dementia, where it's been very difficult to enforce social distancing. I think there's also a situation, knowing from some of the facilities managers I know in the community where they manage community homes, that I think as people get older, they become a little bit more arrogant. Probably if you speak to my staff, they'll probably tell you that. But I think that because of which, then people aren't actually, people are going, well, hang on a minute, it won't affect me, and I've been through the war, or those type of things. You haven't seen the full of this. And that's been very difficult. So in terms of our children's and adolescent services and our adult wards, our infection rates have been very, very small. I'm afraid I can't give you a percentage of what that is in terms of patient numbers, but if I would say that it's been out of 20 patients, we've had less than sort of one per ward that's been affected at any one period of time. However, in terms of our elderly care wards, that's probably been more in the region of 50 to 60% for a period of time. That's been fairly short in its duration, but it's been concerning enough for us to worry about. And we have an inpatient population of around about 516 beds, which was down to about 480 at the present time during COVID. And we've had 4 fatalities during that time. So it's less than 1%. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Richard. It does. Mark?
Yeah, I think again, similar to what Richard said, I think most of the cases that we've had, although we have had cases in some of our working age areas, I think they've predominantly been in kind of older adult areas, so we've been trying to kind of manage that. I think a lot of those cases now have thankfully started to come down and reside, but I think it's obviously just managing and maintaining the actions in place until things hopefully start to change for the better.
Thank you, Mark. Well, folks, it's 4 o'clock now, so I'm going to first of all thank Richard, Mark, Wendy, Neil and Philip for their contributions today. It's been great. Thank you very much indeed. I hope that you've all enjoyed the session and indeed the whole week. Don't forget, as Wendy's indicated, they are or will be next week on demand on the website. So do go and have a look at the ones that you've missed or the ones that you want to refresh. I hope we're all able to meet again in person on the 16th and 17th of November at the RICO, but we're looking at that every day. And finally, thank you for your attendance. Stay safe and well, and I hope you have a good weekend, although I think the weather is not going to be too good. They're giving monsoons for Yorkshire. Thank you very much, everybody.
Now, thanks, you, Jenny, and thank you, Chelsea, and everybody for organising this. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good weekend.